Rights are a funny thing when it comes to intellectual property because it can be a very complex scenario depending on whether you're dealing with a living author who is alive and well but has parceled off the rights based on an agreement he has with the publisher of the work, or if they're doing it on their own and self-publishing, they may have sold rights here, here, and here, and they're different rights for each thing. Publishers will often have unique scenarios with an author where they say, well, we will publish your book in exchange for, you know, worldwide first edition rights to this. We want the option of exclusivity for this, and this. We want, first right of refusal, last right of negotiation, that kind of stuff. Um, Rights are complex. And the more mediums you talk about, the more complex those rights issues become, especially when you get into the streaming wars, because streaming is a completely different beast, and no one has quite yet defined how exactly, or at least it hasn't ever settled yet in terms of how money is made from streaming. Obviously, we have subscription based services. That's one way to define it. But then if you're talking about online content as an example, well, a YouTube channel can earn money, and if a company is publishing on their streaming service, as an example, and they have the rights to that property and they're earning money through the subscriptions, but then they're also, publicizing clips on their social media, and those social media channels are monetized, they're also earning money from those platforms as well. And is the author getting income from both of those sources, all of the sources, or are they only getting a lump sum payment? How are the actors being compensated? How are the writers being compensated? For those adaptations, the artists, so on and so forth. Rights are complex. That's the easy version. So when it comes to looking at what is going on with the Rings of Power, it becomes an even more confusing mess, or a disaster, even, if you will, because for some odd reason, the Tolkien estate either refuses or is bound from doing so, but will not give up the rights to the Silmarillion or any of the additional supplementary uh, content for Middle Earth above and beyond what was sold all the way back in the 1970s when J.R.R. Tolkien was still alive and did so to generate a paycheck, which, as I understand it, was to have his children be able to pay their inheritance tax, which at the time was absurdly high because of the laws in England at the time. Now, here we are, 50 some odd years later, however long it's been, things have changed. However, we still seem to not be able to get our hands on, we the public meaning, the Silmarillion or any of the supplementary material. There are rumors about why that's the case, but there are no confirmed reasons for that. What's really interesting is that estate lawyers are the ones who will traditionally handle all of these issues for an entity where you have a family who is continuing the rights that were originally established by the author. Agatha Christie's family, as an example, but J.R.R. Tolkien's family is another. There's also seems to be, in the case of the Tolkien estate, a long-standing belief from J.R.R. Tolkien down to Christopher Tolkien that the books were just so complex that it's impossible to ever properly put those into a visual medium. Therefore, we're just not ever going to do it. Now, we don't know what's going on with the current administration under Simon Tolkien and those who are left, but we do know that it still appears that the Tolkien estate has not given up the rights to the Silmarillion. And one would question why that is, because Simon Tolkien seems to be more than willing to accept things such as the creation of characters which have nothing to do with the established literary property. He appears to be on board for the Rings of Power showrunners to write the novel that Tolkien never did. And if you read a lot of the press releases from the Tolkien estate and Amazon, you will see Payne and McKay continually praising Simon Tolkien. And this is, I'm not doing a direct quote, but I'm paraphrasing here. They praise Simon Tolkien for helping us navigate the tricky waters around the rights issues at play. If you also go back to the original press release, it says that they have the rights to do this, and they also can theoretically have one-off rights for additional characters or things on an as-needed basis based upon what the Tolkien estate dictates is permissible or not. Now, all of this comes down to, it seems to me that there is something in place that is keeping the Tolkien estate from offering up the rights to the Silmarillion. Because if they really did, if there really was a desire to create the best possible adaptation of the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, then it would make sense that whoever's the production company, we being the public, but it would make sense that they offer up the full rights to the Silmarillion so that whoever's the person behind that adaptation has the full run of all of the characters from the Second Age and all of the storylines so that they can do a Peter Jackson style approach to things and actually create a story about the Second Age. Even if they just wanted to pick narrow portions of the Second Age and say, oh, there's 6,000 years of history. I'm paraphrasing there. There's thousands of years of history to choose from. Let's take this 500-year chunk and tell that story in this show. If that show does well, we will then go around and do this chunk of a story in the next show. Or in the case of Amazon, where they bought a property and they plan to do 5 seasons, well, then and people have put out plenty of ideas of ways that this could have been cut up and done, but you pick, you know, this 500 years for season 1, this 500 years for season 2, or this story arc for season 1, this story arc for season 2, this story arc for season 3, and you still could have told the entire story of the Rings of Power, the creation of the rings, the war with Sauron, the fall of Numenor, the Great Alliance, and the leading up to the Third Age. You still could have had all of that in a very well thought out way without needing to create new characters that didn't exist in the books. So again, it comes back to rights. Rights are complex. We don't know what is in play. We don't know what is holding the Tolkien estate back from either being unwilling to or incapable of having the rights to the Silmarillion be available for companies like Amazon to do anything with. And it's not just Amazon. If you look at the deal that the Embracer Group did, they purchased for over $2 billion the entirety of Middle Earth Enterprises rights, which they've had since the 70s, right? With Saul Zaentz company. And that's allowing them to spin off and do anything they want within that time frame. Now, there's a lot they could do within that time frame because, again, they have the rights to everything within The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and the appendices, which means they can spin off and do a whole bunch of stuff because there is quite a bit in the appendices about what was Aragorn doing, when he was younger. And that's actually one of the pitches. I believe it was the showrunners for Game of Thrones who pitched through HBO had pitched a version to the Tolkien estate of a young Aragorn show. I know that was something that was pitched at some point along the way. And that's something that, as far as I understand, is still on the table and is going to be produced somewhere because there is information in the appendices of what Aragorn was doing when he was younger. And so they're going to go back and they're going to explore that somewhere because that's part of the rights that are available to the rights holders. It's a really weird thing though because it's even with if you're looking at modern day writers, modern day authors I should say, who are alive and well, Stephen King, Neil Gaiman, Raymond Feist, Brandon Sanderson, J.K. Rowling as an example, they very much have intellectual properties that they're involved with the adaptations of. And very often they will be in that process, in the writer's room even, helping to say, hey, if we're going to be adapting this to a new medium and you guys need to create a new story because it works better on the film this way, I'll be here helping you and we'll help you create that character so that it fits into the theme. Because there's been plenty of examples where existing shows have created new characters with the help of the original author to make a show that is based on or adapted, it's adapting this story but in a different medium. Ray Feist was even talking about this. I did the video the other day. He was talking about how he's got another adaptation in the works of the Rift Wars saga and the Rift Wars cycle, the first 6 books, and he's talking about how him and Jenny Wirtz are involved, and part of what they are doing is consulting with that production team on how to best adapt the property, and also they're creating new characters for the show. And this is where things get really weird because technically the characters that they're creating with the showrunners for that show are unique characters that don't exist in the literary properties. So the rights issue there is, well, who actually owns those characters now? Because if they're being jointly created for a television show or for a film property, then there are going to be rights associated with the showrunners, then the production companies who put in the money to create that show, on top of, the rights that they purchase from the author to adapt a given work. Rights are complex. And this is one of the reasons why, as much as we love or hate the Rings of Power, depending on your point of view, the one thing I refuse to do, and I think it's very naive of people to do so, is I refuse to put all of the blame on Amazon for any failures there might be in the show. Because there are a lot of production companies involved in this, not just Amazon, right? It's not just Amazon and the Tolkien estate. They are sort of two of the, Amazon being a distributor or the publisher of, and you have the Tolkien estate being the rights holders and selling off the licensing and the rights to different portions of that intellectual property. But there are other production companies involved in the television show, so it's not only Amazon and it's not only um, Tolkien estate. As I understand things, Sony Pictures is involved, as are the other couple production companies. So there are additional fingers in that pie, if that makes sense. So again, it's a complex issue. You can't put all the blame on one person or two people or even 5 people. When you've got 50 to 75, I don't want to call them showrunners, but executives in place who are all of them pushing and pulling for certain distinct visions of things, then you're going to have an even more complex issue at play, because even if the rights are this, there's going to be all these different interpretations of how those little things can be portioned out, divvied up, written about, adapted, and so on and so forth for a show. I don't know. I just think it does a great disservice to everyone involved, from the Tolkien estate all the way down to, the people who are watching the show, even going back to J.R.R. Tolkien himself and his legacy for the Middle Earth, and the Legendarium. I think it does a great disservice to all of the entities involved for anyone to sit there and try to make judgment calls that are saying things like, this has ruined the legacy of the work, or it's ruined Tolkien and it's done this, that, or the other. It hasn't. What it has done, though, is have some people upset about what they think should have been the way things were done. But the reality is, unless and until we ever get a chance to see the actual rights agreement between the production companies and the Tolkien estate for the Rings of Power, we are never going to know what are the limitations that were put in place. Because as we go back to those original press releases with Payne and McKay praising Simon Tolkien for helping them navigate the complexities of the rights issues, there is obviously a lot going on behind the scenes, and things that it's like a minefield, so to speak, of things that they have to navigate around to try to get a show on the air when you're dealing with something that's as complex as the Lord of the Rings. Because it's not as easy as just taking, say, Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn trilogy and saying, here's the Mistborn trilogy, adapt that. No, because you have The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and those are a separate thing, and those rights were sold years ago. And then you have the Silmarillion, which is a separate thing. Those rights have never been sold. And you have the Histories of Middle Earth and the Tales of Middle Earth and War of the Jewel and Children of Huon, and all of these individual books have their own individual rights attached to them. And so if someone were want to, adapt this book but not that book, they would need to get the rights to that book, but then that book also contains portions of histories that are in other books. That's what makes the Middle Earth Legendarium so complex for Lord of the Rings, because it's not just one book or one series. It is a book, a series, and then dozens of supplementary notes and letters and drafts, and depending on which one you're talking about, completely change the way the material can be adapted. It's a fascinating case study for me, in the complexities of the rights at hand, and one of the reasons why I think Rings of Power was maybe destined to fail from the beginning, because they weren't trying to actually adapt anything really. They were trying to create something out of, as they said, these little snippets that they got from the um, the appendices. If they would have just stuck to something that they could actually do, I think we would have gotten a better show. But that's just my opinion. I don't know. This has been a rambling video about rights and opinions and stuff like that. So if you liked it, like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, support in all the ways you can. Links are down below, but the easiest way, drop a super thanks on this video. Join as a member. Check out the Patreon page. Do super chats and stickers, and I'll see everybody in the next episode. Peace.